Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Cam Jennings coming at you on behalf of epicconversions.com. Hope you guys are doing amazing out there. Today, I want to do another book review for you. This is part of my Thoughts on a Walk series, podcast series. Even though, I'm not walking in this episode, we're doing a quick book review for you. I just finished this book right here, Inside Delta Force by Eric Haney. Now, this Inside Delta Force, the story of America's elite counterterrorist unit. I'll give you 10 things about this book that I thought were really, really cool. I enjoyed this book. It was really, really cool. And the thing is, I'm a marketer and I read a lot of business books, but I also like to read books that have nothing to do with business. And the reason why is I'm looking for different places to get insights, besides just the typical business places. I put a lot of content out there, written content, audio content, video content like this, and I'm looking for different places to get insights from, right? So I will be reading books that have nothing to do with business, just to see if I can pull some insights, some interesting things from those books. This one's no exception. Inside Delta Force is a fantastic book. This one came out back in 2002, I believe. But I got 10 points for you on this book. The first thing, this book's about Eric Haney's journey, from selection all the way through retirement. And by selection, I mean when he was selected to try out for Delta Force. There's this whole, process to becoming a Delta Force operator, which is what they call the members of Delta Force. They call them operators. There's this whole process to becoming an operator. And this book takes you on Eric Haney's journey from when he was selected to become an operator, all through his tryout process, all through all the different parts of becoming a Delta Force operator, and on through his missions as a Delta Force operator. It's really cool. It's really, really cool. It gives you this inside look. The second thing I tell you about this book is that it's 324 pages long. All right. So, maybe a little longer than, your average 200 pager. But, it seems like most business books I read are around 200 pages or so. This one's a little longer than that. It's not a business book. But it's not a super long read. I mean, it took me a while to get through it just because I'm a slow reader and sometimes I don't read every day like I should. I should be reading my goal is to read an hour a day. That's my goal. I don't always accomplish that. So, it feels like it takes me a little longer to get through books than it should. But I really did enjoy, moving through this book. It felt like it took me, I felt like it took me over a month or two to read this book. But it's just because there was gaps where I wasn't reading. And also sometimes I will read some of this and then I'll read a different book. I'll switch them back and forth, which is kind of stupid. I don't know why I do that. I guess I do that because if I find myself getting bored with one thing, I'll go to something else and I'll have 2 or 3 books going at the same time. I don't know if that's a great habit or not. It's probably not. It probably has something to do with short attention span from too much internet or something. But anyways, this is 324 pages long. I don't think that's too long. Once it starts creeping over 400 pages, I start thinking, wow, this is a long book, man. But, yeah, it's 324 pages. It was great. The formation of Delta Force is what this covers. It covers the formation of, if you don't know anything about Delta Force, this book will teach you about Delta Force. So don't think that this is just about Eric Haney's journey and you don't get a ton of information about, you get a lot of information about the history of Delta Force because Haney was there at the very beginning. So yes, it's Eric Haney's journey through Delta Force, but you get a lot of information about the founding fathers of Delta Force, what how this organization got started, what it means to be a part of it, everything. You learn a lot about Delta Force from this book. It's really cool. Um, One thing that I kind of like was questioning about this book was, Eric Haney was married when this book happened, and he had a family, but you never really hear anything about his family in this book. He never talks to his wife in this book. There's like one part where like he's getting ready to go on deployment and he sees one of his buddy's wives that happens to be there, and she asks him if he wants her to let his family know that he's leaving and he's gonna be back when he can. Um, and he said, yeah, yeah, thank you. So like, in that situation, I thought it was weird because like he didn't even tell his wife he was leaving. He just had another guy's wife tell his wife he was leaving. So it was kind of weird. I didn't understand the whole family thing. His family's not in this book at all. Like, he does not talk about his family. And I think that's a little weird to me. That seems weird to me. You have a family, you have a wife, you have kids. That's a big part of your life. Like, why is none of that in this book? Like, that seems like a big discrepancy to me. I understand why, maybe, that he was doing that, and that was because he wanted the book just to be about Delta Force. He didn't want to talk about his personal life or his family, maybe. But the book really does read like an autobiography of sorts. So even though it's about Delta Force and it's about being inside Delta Force, it still feels weird to not have family in there at all, because all this crazy stuff was happening to him, and it just seems weird that like, you never hear about his wife or his kids or anything like that. And I don't know, it just seemed kind of weird to me, So that's one thing that I would say. I don't know if I'll call it a negative, but I did find it strange, and I did find myself wondering, what's the family life like? I mean, what is it like with your family? Like, how does this affect your wife or whatever when you're gone for a long time and you're doing these life risking missions everywhere? Like, are you getting a divorce? Like, do people just not want to deal with that? What's it like? Like, how are your kids taking it or whatever? Like, I guess you kind of wonder about stuff like that. I'm a family man, and I know how everything I do in life, I have to kind of juggle through the lens of being a family man, I have to think about how it affects my family, and I have to think about, like, the decisions I make, I have to think about how they're going to affect my family and stuff like that. So I guess from my standpoint, knowing that he had a family when the stuff in this book took place, I did wonder about what was going on with that. So that was one thing. It was, I guess I'd call it a negative. It was kind of weird that there's nothing in there about that. So in this book, it's interesting because you get a lot of as it goes on, it's really cool because like when it starts, you got a guy who is very, very dedicated to, the Army, and he's an Army Ranger, and then he gets picked for selection for Delta Force, and as he moves on through Delta Force, and as he goes on missions, and as he's a Delta Force operator, he goes from being this green guy who's 100% dedicated to being this guy who sees some of the corruption and some of the weird stuff that goes on, behind the scenes with the politics and stuff. You see a transformation there. You see a transformation in the way it's not like he's a different person, but he becomes more. He becomes more. He becomes, there's more to him, He's not just true blue dedicated to, the government. Now he's true blue dedicated to Delta Force, but he knows that the government is not just like one thing that is trying to do good in the world but makes mistakes. He knows the government is like this, conglomeration of people with their own agendas and their own ideas. And I guess he seems a little more jaded, and you can see that arc in here. You see in the beginning how he's true blue, and then like towards the end, before he gets ready to retire, you see he's a little bit more jaded about how things go sometimes. It's really interesting how it goes, but you do get a sense of government corruption and politics from a different lens, from a lens of someone who's, like, we can all say, oh, we know there's corruption in the government, we know there's corruption in politics, we can say that, we all can say that, but you can't say it from the viewpoint of a special forces Delta Force operator. It's a different thing. When you're risking your life for something, you won't get credit for it because it's not even supposed to be happening, right? But you're doing it, and it's just a different thing to see it from that lens. So that was really interesting to me. And Haney explains that really, really well. The way he writes, is really something. There's a lot of crossover for marketing lessons in this book. I pulled a lot of things away from this book. I've already used some of the stuff in this book. I know I did this email a while back where I was talking about how Delta Force practices and trains to shoot. They got this special way they shoot guns that's different than the way a normal person would shoot. Another thing I found interesting was when they were talking about like how they developed these special kind of bullets to where they could like snipe people, basically. Like they could snipe someone because oftentimes terrorists use like crowds as cover, because they won't get sniped by government, military people, because of the fact that like the bullet will go through their head, it will go through them, and it will kill innocent civilians. So like it's perfect cover to shoot from a crowd. Well, they talked about how like Delta Force, they kind of developed this special kind of like way of making their own bullets, to where the bullet would have the right amount of gunpowder, and it was just the right kind of bullet to where it would have a lot of force to get there, but it would stop as soon as it hit the body, so there wouldn't be an exit wound. They went into detail about how they figured that out and how they did it, and how they practice on like live goats to make it happen, and how they regretted killing the goats, but it was in the effort of saving human lives. I don't know. It was really detailed, Anyways, the point is, I got so many like ideas in my mind about how that relates to marketing and how it relates to online business and stuff. Just really cool stories, that I can pull out of there, and that's why I recommend reading books like this and books that have just nothing to do with your business and stuff like that. When you're trying to come up with stories and interesting things to talk about for content, fantastic. So there's a lot of crossover lessons. Number 7, this is told from a place of experience, and it's written well, all right? And what I mean by that is Eric Haney pulls you in, all right? It's obvious he experienced this stuff. It's obvious he's not writing about things he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's obvious he was there when he's talking about like the hydraulic fluid on the floors of the choppers. There's this whole section where he was talking about being in a Black Hawk and like bullet tracers like flying through the air, and he said there's nothing. He was talking about how like there's nothing as terrifying as being in a chopper, being in a helicopter, and like being the target of ground fire, where like you are the thing that they're firing at. There's nowhere to go. You're just in the chopper. You're trying to make yourself as small as possible, and bullets are flying everywhere. But the way he describes that, man, it's like it almost like pulls you into it. You're there, and it's the detail and the way he describes it is he's really good. It's really good. It pulls you in. And I don't know if that's because he's some kind of amazing writer or if that's because he lived it, because he's not like some kind of like special writer or something, but he's writing from this place of experience, and the experience, like, he's good at describing the experiences. It's really something that pulls you in. The way he describes the beginning of selection, where he was first trying out for Delta Force, that pulled me in. That made me want to keep reading the book. The way he described it, the feelings and just the way he described it it just pulled me into it because, I didn't like, have any care one way or the other about Delta Force. I never really thought about it. I was in the Navy, so like, if anything, I'd be more interested in the Navy SEALs. But the way he writes, the way it pulls you in, so I really enjoyed that. The eighth thing I tell you about is the things in this book. I pulled so in this book, there are things that are happening that a lot of people know about geopolitically. Things that were happening in Beirut, things that were happening in Panama and Colombia, South America, things that were happening geopolitically in the 80s and 90s, in early 90s through the 80s, basically. This book takes place through the 70s, through the late 70s, all through the 80s decade, and then the very beginning of the 90s. It's mostly through the 80s, basically. This book takes place in the decade of the 80s, and there are things that were happening geopolitically in the 80s that you probably know about, but this book gives you a different lens to some of those things that were happening. Like, you're going to learn things in this book that you did not know about, unless you've read this book, geopolitically, right? So there's things in here he talks about that you probably know about, but like the official stories about those things. This book tells you what really happened with those things. So that's pretty cool. I really like that. And that leads me to my ninth point. This book takes place through the decade of the 80s, okay? It starts, his selection is in like the, I think he's selected to be a Delta Force operator or to try out for Delta Force in like 78 or 79. And this is when Delta Force is first getting started. And then it takes place all through the 80s. And I think he retires in like 1991 or something. So it all happens through the decade of the 80s. That's when this all takes place. And then the 10th thing I would tell you about this book is that my biggest takeaway is that Delta Force operators, they're badasses, man. Like, they are like freaking, man, they're something. They're not like, this is like as close as you can get to a superhero as humanly possible without actually being a superhero. These dudes are badasses, all right? That's something that I took away from this book, and I knew that Delta Force was special forces. I knew that. And I knew that special forces were really, really tough. I knew that. But as far as like really, truly understanding all the different kinds of training that these guys go through, so many different kinds of training on so many different levels, I mean, I can't even explain it. Like, it's more than just physical combat. It's more than just like, melee combat or weapons combat. It's a lot of stuff, CIA training, spy training, terrorist. They're counter-terrorist units. So to become counter-terrorist units, they pretty much have to be able to think like a terrorist. They have had so much training from so many different sectors. I mean, they're just complete badasses. So I definitely walked away from this book with a new respect for Delta Force and, Delta Force operators, which before I read this book, I didn't even know they were called operators. I didn't know that. So I think like now I've learned, not from this book, but just from being interested in this subject, I've learned that there's a show called The Unit that goes into more detail about like Delta Force. And I think Eric Haney had something to do with that show. I think he was like an advisor for that show when they made it. So I'm definitely interested in checking out that Unit show. I don't know, I don't know what it's about exactly. I don't know if I'll watch the whole thing. But I'm interested. Anyways, I just wanted to give you a review of this book. I just finished it. I liked it a lot. I thought it was great. It might not be for everybody. There is some graphical stuff in here, okay? He does go into detail about killing people and some areas there. This is talking about Beirut at a time where Beirut was pretty much a jungle. It was pretty much a war zone. You know, the Christians and the Muslims were fighting in Beirut in the 80s, and I just don't think Beirut's that much better today, to be honest. But you know, back in the 80s, it was really nasty in Beirut. Um, so he does go into some graphical stuff in there, especially later on in the book when he's actually an operator and he's going around the world. So, you know, if that's not for you, then maybe this book isn't for you. Just keep in mind, this is a book about, you know, a Delta Force operator, and they do a lot of crazy stuff. So, you know, if you can't handle that, then this might not be for you. But you know, I found it to be a really good book. So, anyways, very cool, very educational, very eye-opening, and it was worth my time. So I really enjoyed it. Worth my time, worth my money. Glad I picked this one up. So that's all I got for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this book review, leave me a comment, drop me a like. Let me know if there's some book you'd like to see me read or review, and maybe I will pick it up and check it out. Make a case for me in the comment section. All right, peace now.